Welcome to Recovery Comes Home Radio, your go-to podcast for all things related to addiction recovery. Whether you are an individual in recovery, a concerned loved one, or a dedicated professional, this podcast is tailored just for you. Here we are all about empowering you with the tools, insights, and inspiration you need to move forward. So grab your headphones, tune in, and let's embark on this transformative journey together. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Recovery Comes Home Radio. Today, I'm joined by Barb Nangle. She is a boundaries coach and specializes in working with women who focus on what others think and neglect themselves. She is also an author and the host of her own podcast called Fragmented to Whole: Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, where she shares her experience, strength, and hope in 10 to 20-minute weekly episodes. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, Barb. Welcome.
Me too. Yeah, me too. I've been excited for quite some time. Can't wait.
Can't wait either. We're going to have some really good stuff to share with our audiences today. Why don't you start us out with a little bit of your story? You know, what it was like for you, what happened, and what it's like now.
Yeah, okay. So I have been numbing since I was a baby. So I sucked my thumb consciously until I was 8. And I remember being up to 10 and waking up knowing I had sucked my thumb, even though I didn't want to. I'm not sure what I was doing between 10 and 13, but I started smoking cigarettes at 13, weed at 14, drinking at 16. And I was basically high or trying to get high 24/7 from 14 to 24, or sleeping. I mean, it's not that I stopped after 24, it was just that I started doing other things too, and I started going to school and all that. I also think the switch flipped for me in terms of being a normal eater to being a compulsive overeater in my early 20s when I quote quit smoking. And I say quote quit smoking because I quit smoking literally for 6 months. And then for the next 20 years, I either smoked secretly, or if I was out in public with friends who smoked and drank, I smoked with them. But I acted like that was the only time I didn't. And I lied about it for 20
Mm-hmm.
years. I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s. And I just sort of stopped. And that's when I really just sort of, that's when I completely stopped with the cigarettes. And then I drank occasionally after that. And so that's the only reason I know that I'm not an alcoholic, was because that I just stopped. But I definitely wondered many times whether I was an alcoholic. And my weed smoking was, I mean, there were times when it was just constant and then times when it wasn't very often. And now I'm completely clean and sober. And I got into recovery at the age of 52, which was in 2015. And it happened because of my codependence, honestly. So I didn't even know that that was a thing. I'm the kind of person who looked on the outside like I had my shit together. I have a master's degree. I had a career. I own a home. I pay my taxes. I volunteered. So it looked like, I had my shit together, but like internally, I was a mess. And I would say the one area that I was very clear was not working for me was romantic relationships. I've never been married. I've never had children. When I did my relationship inventory in recovery, I had 28 different relationships. Some of them were full-blown boyfriends I lived with. I was in the relationships for years. Some of them were just dating. Some of them were just, fooling around. Some were friends with benefits, but lots of different relationships, all of them dysfunctional. And I thought the theme of them was that the guy, because I happen to be heterosexual, the guy was emotionally unavailable. And that's true, but the real theme was codependence. And the other thing I learned in recovery was that the reason that I was attracted to emotionally unavailable men and attractive to those men is because I was emotionally unavailable. I did not know that. So what happened was in the fall of 2014, I volunteered to lead a project at my church serving homeless people. And right around that same time, this homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner, and he and I became very friendly. And I felt like it was like, whoa, God bringing me, the universe bringing me a homeless person to know as a friend, so that when I started leading this project serving homeless people, that they would be really like people to me, not just like the homeless. And we became very friendly. And a couple months into our friendship, we had a really bad snowstorm. I live in New Haven, Connecticut. And I invited him to stay at my home, and he did. And I now know that is not normal to invite a homeless person to stay in your house. And he stayed another time and another time. And within a few weeks, he was practically living with me. I felt trapped in my own home. He was an alcoholic and an addict. And he wasn't actively drinking when I first met him, but he was using, though for some reason I didn't know that initially. And,
Wow.
he may have been a narcissist too, because this guy fucked with my head like nobody ever had before. And so I started talking, or I was talking about him in therapy. And actually, I want to put a pin in that for a second and say I started therapy at 15, and I didn't go continuously, but damn close. So I was 52 when I got into recovery. So it's 37 years of therapy. I got introduced to the self-help genre at 24. I've done workshops and workbooks and retreats and physical fitness and health and spiritual, like you name it, all kinds of stuff. And those things, the way I think of it is this, Adrian, those things sort of scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life. Recovery melted the iceberg for me. I've got deep, lasting change in my life in ways that I didn't even know that I needed. So, anyway, back to talking to my therapist about Dan. And I was talking about him one day, and all of a sudden I went, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon? And she was like, yes. And I don't know what I put into Google, Adrian, but I was looking for Al-Anon. And I found the word codependent, and I was like, whoa, wait, what? What the hell is this? So I started going to Codependence Anonymous, and I remember saying to my therapist, listen, what the fuck else don't I know about myself? How is it possible that I've had this lifelong introspective journey of self discovery and self help and self growth and personal development, and I've never heard the word? Like, what else don't I know about myself? I said, listen, I don't feel like I got hit in the head with a baseball with this news that I'm codependent. I feel like I got hit in the head with a planet. I was so devastated. I was grateful to know, but it was like, how can this giant thing about me be true and I didn't know about it? And she said, Barb, I think for you, codependence is a unifying concept. It pulls together a whole bunch of things you did know about yourself. You just didn't understand they were related. And initially, I thought she was saying it to make me feel better. But as I got to know more and more about this thing called codependence, I realized that she was right. Well, I felt a sense of relief almost immediately, partly at knowing that there's something about me,
Hmm.
partly knowing there's a recovery program, and also meeting other people like me. And one of the things I remember saying very quickly was, I think I need to be reparented. But I thought I made that up, Adrian. I didn't know that was a thing. 6 weeks into my CODA recovery, I go to Cape Cod and I go to visit my friend, and she's been in AA for like 10 years, just radical transformation of her life. She's just raved about how much her life has been turned around. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to CODA. She's like, oh, this is great. Let's see if we can find a CODA meeting and we'll go while you're here. Well, she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting. So that's Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. I had heard of ACOA. I didn't know those are the same. And I don't think I heard of the and dysfunctional families part of that.
Absolutely.
So, right.
100% right on with that.
Yeah. So she's the adult child of an alcoholic. I don't identify as the adult child of an alcoholic, but I was like, I'll go for you. And I walk in and they say, we reparent ourselves. And I was like, what? And then they read the 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. Now,
Hmm.
my girlfriend tells me that I sobbed the entire meeting. I don't remember that, but I bought the literature, came home to New Haven, Connecticut, started going to an ACA meeting, and it's a trauma recovery program. And I was like, what is this trauma? And in the beginning, I was kind of making excuses for why I was there because it was very clear I've got the traits, but I didn't get the shit kicked out of me. I didn't get raped. I didn't get my bones broken. I didn't get burned. I didn't like all these things that I'm hearing all these other people, but I have the traits. And so I kept kind of making
Hmm.
excuses for why I was there. And meanwhile, I'm still going to CODA. And then I started to understand that the absence of good things happening can result in trauma. What I later heard was trauma
Mhm.
results from unmet needs. So this program really deeply and profoundly changed me. So I think it was a combination of the 12 steps of recovery and the trauma recovery. So let me just fast forward and say that I continued to go to CODA and ACA for the first year, but I just wasn't, I felt like CODA was maybe like a 75% fit and ACA was 100% fit.
Mhm.
And I was just not seeing and experiencing the kind of recovery in CODA that I was seeing and experiencing and reading about in ACA. So I said, I'm going to let go of the CODA meeting. Well, that turned out to be my higher power because that was a Monday night meeting. And then as this was happening, I was in the doing step 4 in ACA, which in ACA is different than in AA. In ACA, step 4 is we look at what happened to us, not just what we did. So, what were the traumas that we sustained? And we get at what we did by way of what happened to us. So, let me just give a brief example, and then I'll tell you why this was a higher power moment. In my family, what happened to me was I grew up where we indirectly communicated. You didn't ever go to the person you
Mhm.
had difficulty with. You talked to everybody around them. This was a communication pattern laid down in my life before I was born. There was no hope of me growing up in that family, knowing that direct communication was a thing. So, what I did was gossip. Right.
Yes.
So in my other program, if I had done the steps in there first, I would have only come up with I gossip and I probably would have been riddled with guilt and shame, like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. But in ACA, it was like this is a communication pattern that was passed down to you. We in ACA, we recognize we are a product of our environment. Whereas in
Mhm.
my other program, I'm not allowed to look at my environment. So speaking of my other program, I am doing step 4 in ACA and I am hitting a bottom with sugar. So I am an abstinent compulsive overeater and sugar addict. I have been abstinent, which is the equivalent of sober in AA, for 7 years. I have been at my goal weight. I'm down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I've been at my goal weight for over 5 years. Well, I was hitting bottom with sugar while I was doing step 4 in ACA. And this is because I was digging up all the trauma. Right.
Right.
Now, I mentioned that in my early 20s is when the switch sort of flipped for me to become a compulsive overeater. In my 20s, I battled with like 35 pounds. In my early 30s, it went to like 80 to 100. And then I don't know what my top weight was. The top weight I saw on the scale was 247. And I don't know how much more. I don't know if I weighed 30 pounds more, 50 pounds more. I really don't know how much more because
Right.
I stopped looking at the scale. And I always liked sweets, but it was really food was my thing. And I definitely binged, but I was much more of a grazer. I was on the seafood diet. I see food and I
Mhm.
eat it, and I was just constantly eating. But that last year or so, I could not cram enough sugar in my face. I just, we talk about the illness being the illness of addiction being progressive, like absolutely with me
Mhm.
with the sugar. So I am also in Overeaters Anonymous, and I feel like the combination of the two different programs, and if people don't know OA, we use AA literature, and we do have our own too. But like I did the steps like in the Big Book way, and
Mhm.
that sort of thing, and so I've done it in both ACA and OA done the steps several times, and you know, you asked me like, what was it like? What happened? I mean, the transformation has been utter. I will say that for me, especially because for me, my core wound is the codependence, and that's the result of trauma. So for me, learning how to build healthy boundaries has been imperative. And
Mhm.
this is why I became a boundaries coach, because if I understood boundaries years ago and learned them, then things would have changed. And I will tell you that I learned how to build boundaries in this sort of haphazard way over like a 2 to 3 year period of time. And I don't even think I understood that's what I was doing at the time. There were times when I understood, oh, these are boundaries and that's what I'm doing. But much of it I came to understand in retrospect. And what I've done is I've figured out like retroactively learning about boundaries and going, oh, that's what I was
Mhm.
doing. And this is what I was thinking. And these were the perspectives that I shifted. And this is the behavior I changed. So I've created a program that accelerates the boundary building process for people. But I will say that being in a food program enormously helped my boundaries. I would say the bulk of the learning boundaries came from ACA. But when you're in a food program, like having a food plan is a boundary.
It's a boundary.
Learning refusal skills, because in our culture, people give a shit about what you're eating and when you're eating and how much you're
Yes, they
eating, and they
do.
feel like it's their business and they force food on you, especially if they know that you've always really liked food and stuff. And so I had to learn how to assert my boundaries in a way that worked for me, where I wasn't being a jerk to people, but I also didn't like take it. And so, I mentioned I'm a sugar addict. So in the beginning, I would say to people, I don't eat sugar. Well, when they hear that, they're like, let's turn Barb into a research project. Like, well, what about, do you eat fruit? What about artificial sweeteners? You know that there's, sugar. And now like I don't want to talk about it. So what I now say is I have food issues. And most people don't ask anything else, because nowadays we got people that are gluten free, that have
That's
celiac
right.
disease, people that are vegan, that are eating paleo or whatever. So when you say I have food issues, most people, another thing I just started doing in the last couple of weeks was saying I don't eat other people's food, because like I'm at work and somebody is like, oh, I have a whole bunch of XYZ, help yourself. And I'm like, no, thank you. And they're like, oh, well, you can take some home. And I'm like, no, thank you. No, really, there's plenty. Take some home. And I said, I don't eat other people's food. And I'm like, oh my God, that works really well. And it's not that
Yeah,
I don't
that's
ever eat
great.
other people's food, but it's planned, so learning
I
how
always tell
to,
people to let my no be no,
yeah, yeah.
because I have the same issue, but in reverse, because I was born with a congenital problem with my pancreas. And after I was diagnosed with pancreatitis and I had 200 hospitalized pancreas attacks,
Oh
I,
my goodness.
yeah, it was brutal. I mean, brutal. And so it's amazing to me how many people really do care about how much you eat. How many people told me I was anorexic? If you take 5 minutes to get to know me, that's not my issue. It's a chronic health issue that I've been on IV nutrition for. But it was interesting. You mentioned boundaries. And I remember the day that I was talking to my mom about boundaries, and she said, what is that? And
Yeah.
also the ACA. I attended my first ACA meeting online. And I also initially thought that it was for families of alcoholics, and that was not my situation. But when my
Mhm.
husband had an ACA, the ACA big book, the big red
Yeah,
one,
big red book. Yep,
the big
yep.
red book, and I started looking into it because I love the literature. I love AA literature. I
Mm.
love NA literature. I
Yeah, me
love
too. Yep.
the literature. And so I started reading the literature. And it's very hard when you realize that you meet the criteria of that laundry list.
Yeah. It's hard, but it's also so freeing to
Yes.
understand this. Like I remember reading the Big Rec book and I'm like, oh my God, 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 this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. Like I didn't know something quote happened, right? But I was reading it and I was like, did they film the inside of my brain? Like
Yeah.
what the hell is going on here? And I was just so it was like this is it, this is the core issue. And I will say that when I meet other people that come into ACA, especially if they have been in like, say AA or NA for decades, and they've been clean and sober for decades, but their life is still unmanageable,
Unmanageable.
they're like, oh, this is the core issue. This is like for me, I'm like, this is why I ate, this is why I drank, this is why I drugged, this is why I did it, this is why I, got into sex and alcohol and all that stuff. Like, because we're trying to like, we all know we're trying to numb ourselves. And it's, the idea in ACA is we've been traumatized. So we're literally living in fight or flight mode our entire lives. And so to us, that like system going la 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 all the time is normal to us,
Yeah,
and so a
and
lot
that's
of
how
people
I
will
think
sit.
that recovery from anything is the same as recovery from everything. How you
Hmm.
approach
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
recovery
Hmm.
aspect
Hmm.
is the same across.
programs. It's
Mm-hmm.
also the same
Mm-hmm.
for like when I
Mm-hmm.
had to recover physically. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we call them the ABCs of recovery. Accept your
Mm-hmm.
situation and prioritize action. Be brave
Mm-hmm.
enough to start over and over and over until you get there.
Mm-hmm.
And create a stellar support system starting with
I
a higher
love it.
power.
I love it. I've never heard that ABCs before. You totally have to email me that because that is awesome. I love an acronym. And another thing I absolutely love are the slogans from recovery. And so many some of them aren't technical slogans of the program, but like one of the most powerful ones I learned, Adrian, was info, not ammo. In other words, when you start to unfold in your recovery journey and you learn things about yourself that you don't really like, use it as info, not ammo. This is information to learn, integrate, and grow from. It is not
Wow, that's a game
ammunition.
changer right there,
Oh,
Barb. I've
for
never
me,
heard
and it's
that
also one of
before.
the one of the most powerful things that I teach my clients. So I have always had high self-esteem. I've always liked myself. What I learned in recovery was that I didn't love myself and that I did not have high self-worth. So when I look at my behavior in the past, that is not the behavior of a woman who felt worthy. So even though I had high self-esteem, I realized in recovery, I was literally like scanning the horizon at all times for where can I beat myself up. So when
Mhm.
I learned this info, not ammo, I was like, oh, wait, this is info, not ammo. And here's the thing about beating yourself up. Like you end up battered and bruised. You're not turning yourself into a better person, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you're battered and bruised, that is not a state in which you're going to grow, right? So beating yourself up has got to stop. And then the other term that I also learned this one on a podcast, is the term flawsome. I am both flawed and awesome. So I somehow grew up with the idea that I wasn't supposed to have flaws. And if I had them, well, I goddamn well better hide them. So I was like super defensive all the time. I had all these different masks and facades up and all that stuff. And when I heard the term flossom, it was like, oh, like I literally just felt that in my body as I said it. It was this relaxation. Like just because I'm flawed doesn't mean I'm
Mhm.
not awesome. And so I learned in recovery that it is okay to have flaws. I stopped judging myself for having flaws, which meant I was able to share them with other people, especially in the rooms of recovery, and be authentic and create intimate relationships with people, showing them who I am, the flaws and the awesomeness. And what's really cool is when I stopped judging me so much, I stopped judging all of you so much.
Mhm.
And I really got like, you guys are flawsome too, because I had really I don't want to be judgmental, and I still
Yeah,
sometimes am. I just don't say it out loud. I like check it in my head, and I just, like one of my most important interventions in recovery is to zip it. Just shut my fucking mouth. Actually my sweetheart told me the other day, "Wait, why am I talking?" I was like, "Oh, I've never heard that one before." Like, good one.
I've heard well, I first of all, I don't call myself awesome, but I do call myself a beautiful mess. Um,
Love
I
it.
like
Yeah.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because we are all flawed. And in the
Mhm.
12-step
Of
language,
course.
they talk about assets and defects. And
Mhm.
we all
Mhm.
have them. And
Mhm.
the ultimately the goal is to improve yourself
Mhm.
and hopefully
Mhm.
surround yourself with people who are improving their selves too.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. And people that you can be real with. I think like in the ACA program, the promise number one in ACA is we will discover our real identity. And that's because we've been faking the funk
Mhm.
our whole lives to protect
Mhm.
ourselves. And so I think it should be to create, like discover slash create, because as a child of dysfunction, I didn't get to fully develop all of my gifts. And so part of the journey of ACA recovery is like revealing the part of you that you know is there, that's real, that you've been hiding, but also
Absolutely.
to discover like who else is in there and what else do I want and need and like and prefer. And when I look back, I can see that it was actually the boundary building process that helped me to discover my real identity, because learning how to set boundaries is you deciding what's okay with me and what's not okay
Mm-hmm.
with me. I think of boundaries as standards you have for your life. And
Mm-hmm.
most people think about boundaries as the part where you're communicating them to other people. That's actually just the surface of what's happening with boundaries. It's you figuring out what's okay with me, what's not okay with me. What do I like, want, need, and prefer? And how do I set my life up in such a way that I'm doing way more things that I prefer and way less things that I don't prefer? And I'm getting other people to go along on that journey with me. And that's how I really discovered, my real identity and became my authentic self, and
Mm-hmm.
really like learned to thrive. I think if you had asked me before, I would have said I was thriving. No, I was totally not thriving at all.
Yeah,
That's why I
and
needed
and
to
you
quit
hit the
drugs
nail
and
on the
alcohol.
head. You hit
Yeah.
the nail on the head earlier when you said you're in that you're always in a state of fight, flight, or freeze if you're
Yes. Yes.
traumatized. And all of our
Yes.
residents come to us with trauma, every single one, and all of our
Of
clients that we
course.
work with remotely have trauma.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's in my opinion, it's in other programs it goes unaddressed.
Agreed, agreed. And I think that's why so many people, after years of recovery, of being like really clean and sober and doing a great program, are still like, what the hell is going on? And they come to ACA and they're like, oh, okay, this is the core issue. But it needs to happen that way, because what we say in ACA is you can't recover from the ACA issues if you're drunk. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
have to clean up your primary addiction first.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough
I
that,
love that.
yeah, okay, I was a food addict, but when and yes, you're lying and cheating and stealing when you're a food addict, because it doesn't matter what kind of addict you are. But I wasn't inebriated the way that you would be if you were doing drugs or alcohol. And actually, I want to say about like the lying and cheating and stealing. Like, one of the biggest revelations for me in recovery was that I thought I was an honest person. Like, I truly believed I was an honest person when I got in recovery. Oh my God, no, no, I was not. I lied about cigarettes, like I mentioned. Like, for 20 years, I lied to people about smoking cigarettes. I lied about drugs. I lied about alcohol. I lied about relationships.
Yeah.
But mainly, I lied in the people pleasing department, because I was saying yes to things I didn't want to do. I
Yeah.
was saying no to things I really wanted to do, because either I was afraid you were going to judge me, or I was putting other people first. And then, of course, getting resentful of them, So, like, for me, honesty is super important, because if I'm lying, I might as well just start using drugs and alcohol and eating the food again, because
Absolutely.
it doesn't work for me. And
And that's
in the
a
AA,
critical point. Yeah, that's a critical
yeah,
point about first you had to be truthful with yourself
yes,
and
yes.
say, okay, like it or not, right or wrong, this is my situation and I'm going to have to do something about it. I call that the stop, drop, and roll moment.
Yeah, yeah, good point. And I think the promise in the AA Big Book that comes to mind right now is, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And
Yes.
for me, the place where that comes true the most often is in my romantic relationship. So I am now, for the first time, in a very healthy romantic relationship. I was 55 and he was 60 when we met. We've been together going on 5 years. And I just know what to say. And I think it really has to do with, one, I really know myself, and
Hmm.
two, I am honest. So if I don't, like, I remember one time in the beginning saying to him, I feel unsettled about this thing that happened between us. And he was like, well, what is the unsettled about? And I was like, or what do you mean by that? And I was like, I don't know anything more than that. But what happened was, it started a conversation. Whereas in the past, I never told anybody if I was unsettled. I just buried that
Right.
shit,
Right.
and then I like buried that, and I buried 17 million other things. And the next thing you know, there's a giant wall that's really wide between me and my partner, but I'm blaming them for everything that's going on in the relationship.
Hmm.
And what's another really interesting about my relationship with him is that, we'll have these interactions where I'm both in it with him, but at the same time observing it and going, oh my God, this would have been so different in the past. And I can see all the things
Yeah.
I was doing previously. So one thing that's come clear to me about my previous relationships is that I believed that all those guys were the problem, and that if they would just change their ways, then everything would be great in the relationship. But I was responsible for all of the good things in the relationship. And that's like insane on the face of it, right?
It
If
is,
you
but
are
it's
like me, listen,
psychologically,
yeah,
it is
yeah.
psychologically true.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you're listening to this and you think that your partner is the entirety of the problem in your relationship, this is a wake-up call for you that that's bullshit. Like you are part of the relationship and you are contributing to the problems. And here's the thing. Only one person in a relationship is required to change it, but all of us know that. But you know what we think? We think it's the other person. Well, guess what? You are only in charge of you. So if you start to change, the relationship will change. And I love the metaphor of the dance that Harriet Lerner uses in the Dance of Anger book. And she says, when
Yes,
you're dancing with someone, if you change your steps, they have got to change their steps or exit the dance. And I love that metaphor.
I do too. I don't remember how old I was when I first came across that. It was actually a suggestion to read it from a family therapist. And it was very interesting. The dance of intimacy, the dance of anger, right? Or the dance, I've got it
Yes.
reversed.
Yeah.
Dance of anger, dance of intimacy.
She has
And
those are two different books. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I thought that point was so right
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm.
You have changed the game, and either
Mm-hmm.
others are going to level up with you
Uh-huh.
or they're going to fade away.
Right, right. Or just diminish, like I have, I did lose a lot of people in my life, I will say. And
Mm,
it wasn't like a hard like year out kind of thing. They just sort of faded away. But there are a few people that are still in my life, but they're on the periphery of my life now, as opposed
right.
to the center of my life, because it just doesn't work for me. Like my pattern was I chased my friends. I did like 90% of the work in the friendship, and I'm just not willing to do that
Yeah.
anymore. Like I want to be
No.
with people who want to be with me,
Right.
So if you're not willing to meet me halfway, then I'm not fucking doing it.
And you know what's interesting about what you were talking about earlier about this fight, flight, or freeze? That is
Mhm.
what physiologically happens with addictions, because
Yes.
your limbic system takes over and
Hmm.
your dopamine system is hijacked.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you are getting dopamine, we talked about a lot of addictions on this episode today. If you're getting a dopamine drop from something outside of yourself, your own body stops producing
Hmm. Hmm.
dopamine. So that's
Hmm.
why I think that so many people have trouble in withdrawal,
Hmm.
because you just have to get over that period, over that hump.
Yeah.
But it's so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have been blessed that I've never gone through withdrawal from anything. And like people ask me about like what was that first couple weeks like without the sugar? Like honestly, I don't remember. I know that it sucked. But I just like I remember waking up on Wednesday, April 20th, 2016, feeling like I was being internally electrocuted by sugar. That's literally what it felt like to
Wow,
me.
I'm sure.
And
It's
my
so
friend,
corrosive.
it's poison,
It
and
is.
I was taking in gigantic quantities of it at the end there. And so I was actually being 12 stepped into OA by one of my fellows in ACA. I didn't know that. So I texted her that morning and I said, listen, I just have to tell somebody that just today, I'm not having sugar. And I've not had sugar since that day. And ironically, that was a Wednesday. My first meeting was that Saturday. And it was actually an OA workshop. I didn't really understand. I thought she was taking me to a regular weekly meeting. And the first speaker says, I'm down 185 pounds and I've been abstinent for 30 years. And I was like, I'm listening, because I had met I'd known 10 people who had lost over 100 pounds. Every one of them had surgery. 9 of the 10 had gained it back. And I worked for Weight Watchers years ago, and the statistics there are that
Wow.
95% of people gain their weight back. So I was like, this guy's got something. I'm listening. And he proceeded to do a presentation on the cycle of addiction as it applies to food. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a compulsive overeater. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was a thing. Never mind that I was that. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in, you know.
Right.
And, and this is the higher powered moment that I forgot to close the loop on earlier. So they hand me a meeting list. And in New Haven, Connecticut, where I live, there's a Monday night downtown New Haven OA meeting. Well, the CODA meeting that I just dropped was on Mondays. So God was like, you need to get Monday nights free so you can go over here to this other fellowship because this is killing you. And it just, and I still go to that meeting to this day. It's now on Zoom. But you know, really, 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 really changed my life. And I would say the first year and a half was rough, but I've been blessed to have the compulsion has been lifted through abstaining and through the 12 steps of recovery. And, you know, I have a pretty tight food program now. And I also, like, when I first got into recovery, I would drink occasionally, and I just, like, a year and a half, I think, into my OA recovery, I realized I can't. It's liquid sugar, you know, like I can't drink alcohol, and also it clouds my judgment. Like I had a time where I was like, I rationalized that strange mental twist was magnified by the alcohol, and I was like, oh, I can have another snack. No, you can't have another snack, not when you
Right.
have a food plan, you know.
Right. Well, I
Yeah.
am so thrilled that things have turned around for you. And
Yeah.
I think it just what it does for personal growth is just off the charts.
Oh, yeah,
We're getting
absolutely.
we're getting to the end of the episode here, but I wanted to ask you, you know, if you could go back to that old Barb who was blissfully ignorant of all
Mm-hmm.
these things,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say to her? What would you do to motivate her to want something better for her life?
Yeah. You know, that is such an excellent question because I feel like that's what I'm trying to do with my business is I'm trying to reach former me and have her wake up to see that it doesn't have to be this way. This string of dysfunctional relationships has you in common in it, and that there is another way. And I think like the big wake up call for me was, you know, I'm the problem. And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way, because if I'm the problem, that means that I can be the solution. And so what I have
Yes.
learned that is I came out of victim mentality was the primary mindset shift that happened for me in recovery. There's been many of them, but for me, like under believing that like the guy was always the problem was the crack in the door for me to see that I had victim mentality. Because then I realized, oh,
Mhm.
I thought my boss of like when I got into recovery, she was my boss for 17 years. I thought if she would just change, I thought if my friends that I was chasing after, if they would just change, if my brother would just change, if my mother would just change, if my father would just change, that when I started to see like, holy shit, this is a pattern. Well, that's called victim mentality.
That's right.
And one of the things we say in ACA is we go from being reactors to life to actors in life. In OA, we say we go from reacting to life to acting on life. And that's what that means to come out of victim mentality. Like I didn't know, like I could spot a victim a mile away because I was going to rescue those people. So I think, you know, I would tell her like the amount of work that you put into relationships is imbalanced, and it's
Mhm.
imbalanced for a reason because
Mhm.
and the reason they're so dissatisfying is the imbalance. So you putting in more effort is not going to help. You deserve to get your needs met and to also take care of yourself. Like I was always an independent woman, but I didn't understand. Like on some level, I was waiting for someone to rescue me. And you know who that was? It was me and my higher power. And the other thing I would say is that I was a lifelong agnostic until I was 37. And then I read the book Conversations with God, and it changed everything for me. But so I identified as a highly spiritual person when I got into recovery, but I didn't use God the way I do now. So I asked God, show me your will for me and give me the power to carry that out. I say to God, I can't fucking handle this. You have to take it from me. Please take it from me. Use God. And I say God, that's what I call my higher power. That's not what everybody does, but find some kind of power greater than you to which you can turn things over and from which you can seek guidance. I mean, I think there's been so many changes, but that's probably been the biggest one is the higher power component. So, I mean, I could go on and say so many more things, but I think those are the gist of the things that I would convey to former Barb.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. The higher power, what I've heard it used as group of drunks, good orderly direction, a lot of different things. And
Gift
what
of
I can
desperation.
say, yes, gift of desperation. And what I can say is I have never seen such miraculous spiritual breakthrough moments as I have in meetings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
God is at work. God is at work there and everywhere.
Yes.
Well, Barb, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I am definitely going to have you back on the show, but I really appreciate you giving it our primary effort here. This is the first of many episodes to come.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you for the work that you were doing. You matter. You are saving lives. You are saving families, and you are saving generations of families, Adrienne. This does not stop when those people walk out the door. This is generations to come. So just know that you're influencing the history of humanity.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words, my friend. I will see you next time. And thanks everybody for another great episode of Recovery Comes Home. We will see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Comes Home Radio. We hope that today's episode has provided you with valuable information and insights on the recovery process. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. Keep seeking support, practicing self-care, and moving forward one step at a time. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and stay humble. Hope lives here.